Welcome to Good Chat, the podcast from BC Adventure Smart, where we share stories, insights, and tips to help you enjoy the outdoors safely. We talk all things outdoor recreation and adventure, while keeping safety at the heart of every conversation. Our goal is simple: to lessen the impact on search and rescue and help grow a stronger safety culture in BC. Whether you're hiking, skiing, paddling, or just curious about BC's backcountry, this is the place for real stories and practical advice to keep you prepared and confident outdoors. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Good Chat, everyone, with BC Adventure Smart. I'm Sandra Riches, the Executive Director for BC Adventure Smart, and today's episode is called Building Trust, Saving Lives, Indigenous Engagement in Search and Rescue Prevention. We're going to explore a few things today. Some of it will be partnerships across the country, actually. We're going to talk about Indigenous communities and how we can strengthen search and rescue prevention efforts, really enhance safety, because that's really what we're all about here, and how we can all work together a little bit more smoothly, effectively, and productively. Our guest, Tricia Teal, who I just met a few months ago, actually, will share her experiences as she's the project manager for a really exciting national project we've got going, and she can explain all about that as we get into our podcast today. We're going to talk about Indigenous engagement, from listening and learning to co-creating safety messages. That's what I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about. And I've dabbled in it a little bit in British Columbia, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And this conversation is all about preventing emergencies and lessening the impact on search and rescue while we build these lasting relationships and honor Indigenous perspectives. So let's get started. Hi, Tricia. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. So you're on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, for those who are listening outside of Canada. Whereabouts on the island are you?
I'm located in the Comox Valley in Courtenay, which is on the traditional unceded territory of the Comox First Nation.
Is that where you've always resided, or where were you beforehand?
I've just moved here in December, actually. Before that, I was quite nomadic for several years, working in Costa Rica for 3 years, doing adventure therapy guiding, and then guiding in Canada in the Rockies, the Canadian Rockies, and Nova Scotia. And then before that, I'm originally from Sudbury, Ontario, which is in Northern Ontario, and I worked as a high school and alternative education teacher for quite a long time.
Oh, that sounds colorful. I love it.
Yeah.
And you've been involved in outdoor recreation. You've been a guide. You've been front country, back country. You're okay outdoors, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially when I was working in Costa Rica, we were remote camping 5 out of 7 days a week, essentially, when I was on shift.
What first drew you to working with Indigenous engagement? I want to go there, and then I want to talk about the project. But what first drew you to that kind of work?
When I relocated to the island just recently and was looking for a job and really wanted to root here in the Comox Valley, and I came across the job ad for this job, which is Indigenous Community Engagement Specialist with Holistic Emergency Preparedness and Response. And I had been using those search terms because in the past I had worked with First Nations communities, elders, and a lot of my personal friends actually back home in Ontario are Indigenous as well. And so just my worldviews and my past work experiences in alternative education really align with at least the Indigenous communities and worldviews I was exposed to and really honored to be trusted to be a part of and have knowledge sharing there. And it's something that's always been a passion of mine and something I've been really interested in. And then this opportunity seemed like a really great meshing of different skills that I have, because I do have the prevention and emergency planning aspect of things, and then also relationship building from working in a therapeutic environment and with an alternative ed program. So in the alternative ed program I worked in many years ago, I had some Indigenous students in my classroom and worked almost weekly with Indigenous elders and mentors who are now personal close friends. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to connect to people and connect to nature, and maybe those two things connecting as well.
I think it all connects really well. And maybe you can describe a little bit more about the project that you're managing. I had the pleasure of coming over to the island and meeting you, like I said earlier, and understanding a bit more about the project. We did a little bit of Indigenous engagement with search and rescue prevention with BC Adventure Smart a number of years ago, but we ran into some hurdles and some challenges, and it didn't come to fruition. So maybe, Tricia, can you describe what your project is?
A multi-year project, and it's a new initiative fund with Public Safety Canada. And it's really a collaboration between Adventure Smart with Search and Rescue Volunteer Association of Canada, and then Holistic Emergency Preparedness and Response here on the island, the company has tons of phenomenal relationships all over BC, all over Canada, really. And so essentially the whole project's point is to take the Adventure Smart materials and programs. There's several programs, of course, that can be delivered, in communities and already are being delivered in communities all over Canada, and really adapt them and make them more applicable to Indigenous, being First Nations, Métis, and Inuit culture. And at this point in the project, I would even add adapted to a local context as it's evolving, so that these materials are more relevant and can maybe even be partnered or there can be collaborations on a community basis for where the local needs are for search and rescue prevention.
So do you get the pleasure, and I say the pleasure because our country's awesome, do you get the pleasure of traveling right across the country, coast to coast to coast, to meet with search and rescue prevention specialists, Adventure Smart coordinators and directors, and Indigenous communities? Do you get that opportunity to do that?
Yeah. So at this point, I started this position, let's say the beginning of May this year, just a few months ago. And so because it's a nationwide project, I've been doing a lot of the initial conversations, engagement remotely, which has been super cool because I've met a ton of amazing people, community representatives, and eventually there will be in-person sessions in each province and territory in Canada. So I will be traveling and hosting, a one-day session that will be definitely informed by the feedback that I'm gathering in my initial engagement, so that the sessions surrounding Adventure Smart prevention are going to have a practical takeaway and solid information that can include knowledge sharing and gathering in circle. And so, yeah, at some point soon, I'm going to be going across the country over the next few years and hosting these in-person gatherings.
I can't wait for the one that I get to join you. I know we've been talking about that lately and trying to figure out dates and align that. So I'm really looking forward to coming together again and doing what I can to provide support to the project, because I think it's just an amazing initiative that's supported through Public Safety Canada and Search and Rescue Volunteers Association of Canada. As a reminder to our listeners, Adventure Smart is a national program that started here in British Columbia by the BC Search and Rescue Association in 2004. So in British Columbia, we're actually celebrating our 20th anniversary, which is really exciting. And the whole focus behind it is to enhance enthusiasts' awareness, to lessen the impact on search and rescue. And in British Columbia, that's 3,200 volunteer members. We're trying to lessen the impact on those members and add to the safety culture in British Columbia. And that takes so much. We use data to do that. We work closely with partners and we come up with projects and initiatives and we target those to the audience we're trying to reach. And we know the audience that we're trying to reach in British Columbia based on that data in the summertime is hikers mainly in the southwest of the province. Mountain bikers are a close second, and ATV, quad users. And the wintertime, it's in the East Kootenays, in and around Revelstoke. And those users that are requesting search and rescue the most, snowmobilers and backcountry skiers. So we can look at all of that equation and see how we can share messaging and get it out there. Tricia, why is it so important to have SAR prevention reflecting the voices of the communities it serves? Why do you think that's important to have this Indigenous injection?
To be inclusive of everyone, living in the beautiful areas of Canada. And that obviously we live in such a beautiful place where there's such a variation in geography, culture. Really, the program should be inclusive of everybody. And that includes traditional Indigenous activities, which could be varying, and from the feedback I'm hearing do vary. There's more cultural, actual hunting going on, spiritual activities, gathering medicines, gathering berries, which in other areas might not be, as you just mentioned, Sandra, that it's mountain bikers and backcountry snowmobiling. So there's another need for prevention when it comes to exploring on the land for different activities.
Yeah, I agree. And what you said there makes me think of trust and relationships, and I can think of my career in outdoor recreation, which is 35 years ish. Started off as a park ranger, been with Adventure Smart since inception, and I've built trust throughout the community and the country and have relationships as well. The importance of that respect and the consistency of that relationship and just that back and forth of that engagement. And that can come in big forms and little forms. What does building trust look like to you in a community as we all try to practice this trusting relationship building? What does it look like to you?
Active listening is the first word that comes to my mind. I feel like from like the whole point of this project is to essentially decolonize the Adventure Smart programs. And the best way to do that is to go in with a holistic view and a circular view that is asking for feedback and actually listening to that feedback about what search and rescue prevention is needed and how the programs could be more adapted and relevant to a local context. And of course, even using the word Indigenous, it's such a broad term, of course, but this is so regionally varying that it's really just what do the communities, would be the word I would like to use, the communities need, specific communities. That's not going to be something I'm coming into or any organization is going into an interaction with an idea or an outcome or an imposition. Basically active listening. That's how I go into it, is just opening up a conversation. Obviously, when it comes to engagement, especially remotely to start, I have to give some background about the programs, and they are fabulous programs and they are very effective. And there's a ton of great interest in them. At the end of the day, it's really just listening and asking questions and creating that reciprocal space that doesn't feel extractive or like it's being directed externally.
If you're in trouble in the outdoors, don't wait. Call for help right away. Dial 911 as soon as you need help. The faster you call, the faster search and rescue teams can respond and keep everyone safe. If in doubt, call it out. Learn more on the BC SAR Association website, bcsara.com.
You brought up decolonization, and it made me think of one of our 5 programs, the Hug a Tree and Survive program, which you're familiar with, and some of our listeners might know it as well. That program has been translated into a few different Indigenous languages throughout the country. And then 3 of them are here in British Columbia. I've worked with elders and language keepers, which was a really interesting and exciting path for me to travel to find them. Anyway, it was a very enlightening experience for me to seek out, get the support from communities, councils, and find those language keepers and work with them. And I remember asking them, as talking back to the decolonization part, is I wondered what they thought of what we had already created, right? I wondered what they thought of our Hug a Tree and Survive program, even the actual contents and the materials, our coloring book, what it looks like, what it sounds like, and how is it reflecting, and how would that work for them? I was very fortunate, again, to have 3 languages of our book translated into, and they didn't want to change anything. Because I asked them, is there something maybe we should adjust? What would you like to see? And they said, no, this stems from a story of a little boy who got separated from his family, unfortunately passes away due to hypothermia. This story has importance, and they wanted to keep that reflection there. I'm curious, what mistakes can organizations avoid when engaging with Indigenous communities? What do you think about that?
It's actually related to what I was just thinking about, going into an exchange with a linear view of here's the process, this is what it looks like, and then it's over. And also imposing or making assumptions about a program being a one-size-fits-all product or project. And so going into everything with an open heart, an open mind, and consistency, authenticity, integrity, and again, really just respecting time and again, abandoning the colonist, sort of even settler mindset in the process. And so it's trusting time. It's trusting that, as you mentioned, Sandra, that, for example, the Hug a Tree and Survive story, it might not necessarily be the story that needs to be adapted, but making it inclusive of local language and also the delivery of that, storytelling as being a part of knowledge transfer, and then having the learner and the teacher as working together holistically and interconnectedly, and not having this teacher student view and everything separate and linear. And so even just challenging the way that we look at the delivery of prevention education in these projects. And so really, when it comes to any project, it's keeping in mind respect, meaning respect of a different culture, being adaptable and flexible to that, and having a learner's mindset, and actually going into the project hoping to learn something and maybe challenge my own views or anyone's views, as well as having a collaborative approach with reciprocity, right? So instead of going into something or entering into a project or a business situation with an idea of a very, like I said, linear outcome with a goal and an outcome is definitely a mindset that some of us are used to, but looking at it as a building trust in a circular way that's ongoing and has consistency.
It really makes me, I can think of myself, how I need to approach different conversations, engagement, and I'm a very goal-driven person. So when I go into something like that, it makes it's difficult. It's not difficult. I shouldn't say that. I take that back. It's a path I'm used to traveling, and I'm happy to build those relationships and create that confidence in someone else in me. But I also, just out of habit, I guess, I'm looking for that end carrot. Sometimes I start things with that versus, like you just said, stepping back, thinking about getting to know this person and vice versa, and really just talking about the steps along the way versus the outcome or the final product, if you will, or the message, whatever that is, project. I did learn a lot when I worked with the 3 elders and the language keepers on the project I did for the Hug a Tree and Survive coloring book. It was really, really enlightening. You brought up a big piece there that they brought up as well, and it was about storytelling. What role do you think storytelling plays in our Adventure Smart prevention messaging?
Oh, this is something I'm really excited about because I think that the programs, specifically Hug a Tree and Survive Outside, really, as I've been engaging with communities, there's already SAR prevention programming going on. And so when it comes down to what I mentioned earlier about going in and asking questions and actively listening and saying, hey, what do you have going on for preventing accidents in the wilderness? Or I could say empowering youth and people of all ages with knowledge. And there is tons of beautiful, amazing work being done and programs in community being done, whether that's traditional hunt camps or traditional culture camps, and that includes language, traditional hunting, gathering, survival skills, building skills, shelter building, weaving, all these sorts of things. That's already going on. And that includes and has a model inherently built into it of the circular storytelling, right? And if you think of a really good story, it's not this, start, middle, body, end, like a hamburger paragraph from elementary school. It's when you're engaged with someone who's telling a story, it just sort of keeps flowing and then brings it back and all connects in the end, just like a circle. So that's how I really picture, just from what I'm hearing, which I'm honored to be trusted to have received this information in my engagement so far, is that there are tons of SAR prevention programs. They're just not labeled that way. And inherently, those traditional skills are about survival on the land. And so back to what you asked about how the storytelling knowledge transfer can, work with Adventure Smart programming, is that the programs are solid. How can we take those programs, or how can community members champion those programs within their community to deliver them in a way that fits in their model, in their local context, and in their awesome programs that are already going on, almost like just a bolster with some more safety information should just bring that to the table. And it could also include, language translation at the local level. And that could be something as simple as having an Adventure Smart presentation on Survive Outside, for example, and having an elder who speaks the language translate it so it's in English and whatever local language is being used. It can really go in so many directions depending on what each community feels the best inclusion of that could be. So instead of looking at how can we be more inclusive of that, it's like, how can Adventure Smart be included in the awesome programming that's already going on?
I love the way you place that. And we've done this a little bit in British Columbia in ESL, with ESL, English as a Second Language. I remember quite a few years ago, we were trying to think, how do we reach different communities where myself, our volunteers in British Columbia, our staff at the time could reach an audience that we didn't speak their language, as one example. And I remember training some educators, and some of them spoke Cantonese. It was Spanish, German. We had someone who spoke sign language. We had 11 different languages in the room, and we trained them in our programming, which we have 5 programs underneath the Adventure Smart umbrella, and they went back to their communities and delivered it in their languages. So there's another example of how we can collaborate and work together and make it work for all parties, right? We at BC Adventure Smart can't be that for everyone in a language or meet those needs. And this project, I think, is going to really nicely fold in right across the country and how we can all work together.
If you're heading outdoors, be bright, be seen, be found. Wearing bright colors makes it easier for friends and search and rescue teams to spot you quickly if something goes wrong. Robin Blue is a color that's easily spotted by search and rescue members, especially in the fall when reds, yellows, and oranges can blend into the landscape. Stand out to stay safe.
Adventure Smart has 5 different programs underneath the umbrella, and they are Hug a Tree and Survive. That's for kindergarten to grade 6ers. Excellent program. The second one we have is our Survive Outside program, all about trip planning, training, taking the essentials. We have a snow safety education program about being safe on the snow in the front country, let's say within a ski area. Or we also have a portion of that program. It's for backcountry winter enthusiasts. Snowshoeing's huge now. Backcountry skiing, excellent program for that. A little bit of avalanche awareness, basic avalanche awareness. We have a Paddle Smart program, a Survive Outside snowmobile program. And these all really keep everyone in tune with safety, personal preparedness, what to do in an emergency. And I know within those programs, Tricia, we also have some storytelling. And I encourage everyone when I train them to include even a personal story about an outdoor adventure that was successful or an outdoor adventure that wasn't so successful. We can learn so much from our failures, and it can really bode well. So if anyone's interested in those programs, head over to adventuresmart.ca under the programs banner, and you'll scroll to the bottom and you can request outdoor education. Tricia, how do we make sure the initiative of this project reflects search and rescue expertise and those community priorities?
I think keeping the basic 3 T's messaging, to keep a basic structure, which is trip planning, training, and taking the essentials. Keeping that structure, and then keeping the structure that's within, for example, Survive Outside, the key messaging, of course. But what that looks like on a local level, so to highlight those community priorities, is going to vary very much depending on geography, culture, and activity. And so an example I can give would be in engagement with Inuit communities in Nunavut. A typical search and rescue situation would be using snow machines to hunt on really changing sea ice conditions. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that's the biggest issue when it comes to search and rescue. But at the end of the day, if this hunt is for sustenance and it's a traditional activity that's essential for the community, hunters have to go further and further away from their communities to hunt. And that includes higher risk with changing sea ice conditions. And so the SAR key messaging, or so the prevention program Adventure Smart key messaging, for example, the snow machine safety or snow safety, there would be still having the 3 T's, but what that would look like when it's in consult with a traditional elder and traditional local knowledge is going to look very different than what it would be on Vancouver Island, for example. It's really just looking at what the local need is, but then keeping the key messaging, which I think is solid key messaging. And so there's definitely not been any, even like you mentioned with the Hug a Tree and Survive program, like the messaging is solid. It's just making it a little bit more specific in the details to be more applicable to the local context. And so what that could look like in the northern sea ice hunting regions could be having some updated sea ice maps. And there's actually an awesome social enterprise in the north I'm hoping to partner with about this, so that updated sea ice maps can be put on InReach devices so that it's easier and safer to navigate. And then that would tie into trip planning, training, and taking the essentials. So that's an example I can give about how different everything really looks depending on location and community priorities and community needs. So the community priority there would be with the one community I spoke with would be updated sea ice maps and just making that available to hunters.
This just speaks to the differences in our country. It's just incredible, right? You talked about so many opportunities there and just what you explained, and some challenges regionally that are unique. And that can really come back to the project that you're running and how we can all support you with Adventure Smart and what we do, because there's 13 of us. We have a coordinator in every province and territory. I'm fortunate to direct the program in British Columbia with BC Adventure Smart, which is supported through the BC Search and Rescue Association. And we see lots of opportunities as well, but we also see lots of barriers and challenges, and that can be regionally based. You know, it might be very unique for me or for our educators to reach outdoor enthusiasts, let's say up in Atlin, the top of our province, versus way down here in the southwest or in the Sea to Sky corridor, where it's such an active, busy, tourist-centric part of our province that really gets inundated with outdoor recreation, tourism, and search and rescue tasks. It's easy to see when we have data to back it up where our search and rescue calls are happening. And we know in British Columbia, it's in the southwest, primarily through the Sea to Sky, North Shore, Fraser Valley, which that's all really close to the biggest population in the province. So that equation works. We also know in the winter, as I mentioned earlier, it's in the East Kootenays. A lot of people love to go snowmobiling and backcountry skiing in the East Kootenays. Well, that keeps Revelstoke and Golden Search and Rescue pretty busy. So there's challenges and opportunities throughout the whole province, and it keeps us all hopping, that's for sure. I'm curious, what are some of the challenges do you think you might face with this project as you navigate? You know, you're going to be across the country connecting with all of us who understand and work in Adventure Smart, but what are some of the challenges you think you might be faced or maybe have faced already?
I would say ideally engagement, of course, would be best done in person, face to face. I've had so many really beautiful invites to come to the community and let's host something here, and really just connecting face to face can never really be replaced by connecting on a Zoom call. Even though, you know, you can see somebody's face, at the end of the day, when you're breaking bread together, when you're sharing a meal, and making the effort to visit a community, I think that's really the best way to go about that. But because it's a national project, obviously the logistics of that and resources for that are nearly impossible. And so the in-person session will be an awesome way to bring people together from different communities to one central location. But I sometimes think this would be awesome if I had like a camper van and just drove around the country visiting communities with an internet situation. And I don't know, that would be awesome. But of course, logistically, a little bit of an astronomical ask or price. But yeah, so that's one barrier. But I think doing it remotely via Zoom and calling people and making those connections is working for sure. Another barrier I would say in this season anyhow is wildfire priorities. So there's a ton of communities that just are, I often connect with emergency management, emergency coordinators, and there's more urgent priorities, which is deployments of firefighters. Search and rescue teams are being, deployed for that. So it's just a challenging time to focus on prevention education when there's real deal situations happening in community. And I think another barrier to it, like I wouldn't say a barrier, more of a challenge, but also an opportunity would be, youth, I think everywhere are just really struggling. And with various mental health struggles and whatnot. And I think something that's really important, but also an opportunity for this project is connecting with youth and getting them involved. And that's really a potential, I think, for a really cool collaboration or knowledge transference and inclusion, is to have communities having, Adventure Smart programming or whatever that might look like, depending on the community, like traditional programs, traditional cultural programs, and reconnecting the youth in communities with their traditional culture and strengthening that. And so I'm hopeful that, I can have some youth be trained, as an Adventure Smart educator. And there's already been some awesome interest in that, so that youth can then champion the program in community. And then that just brings gathering, brings knowledge transfer, and builds a sense of community. So that's a challenge, of course, is, engaging youth, but it's also, I think, a really awesome opportunity to connect them with the outdoors in a safe way.
I couldn't agree more. And I have an example for that. We trained a few times through a teacher on the island, I believe. He had trained I think they were grade 9, grade 10 students. And I was a part of that as well. So we trained them as educators in the Hug a Tree and Survive program, just the one program. They got credit at school for it. They built confidence in public speaking. And then what they did to gain more credit and to give back and part of their program, they then went to the elementary age students and delivered the program. And the kids received the Hug a Tree and Survive program from grade 9 tenors, and they just loved it, right? So it was someone they looked up to. Maybe they saw in the hallways or on the field or at school, and they were being shared this information by someone in their school who's a student, and they looked up to them. So it wasn't another teacher. It wasn't me. It wasn't any of our staff or educators. It wasn't an adult. It was a youth. And that trained the trainer for youth to then give back to the younger audience was an excellent system, which is what you were talking a little bit about there, Tricia. It's just an awesome way to go. And it really helps out the secondary school age students with so much, right? From public speaking skills, which most people can't stand, but if they can get that under their belt early, they're ahead of the game. Confidence in the outdoors, sharing with others, building confidence in another audience and supporting their community. There's just so many wins. It's crazy. But I'd like to say, if you get a van and you go on a tour, I need to tag along for some of that, because that sounds like the perfect. And it's funny you brought that up, because when I used to have staff and they would travel all over the province, they didn't have vans decked out like we see today, which I love. But I always thought, we need to get a road show going. We need to just be on the road and go from community to community, camp in between, and chat with everybody and engage that way. So if that ever happens, let me know. I'd love to tag along. I'd love to take the passenger seat there. But you also brought up something that made me think of when I first met you, and you spoke about breaking bread. So when I met you for the first time, we were in a room together, and you brought in baked goods that you had made the night before, and you shared them with all of us in the room. There was just a few of us. And I remember how good they were, actually. That's not the point. They were very tasty, but we just ended up starting to talk about that and how good they were. And we appreciated that you did that for us. And you thought of us before coming and did that on your own time. And it was a really great start to our meeting, to our time there together. So thanks for bringing that up today. I just wanted to share that with our listeners, that you did that for us. And it really meant a lot.
Thank you. And I really did that intentionally. I included strawberries in the recipe, which at least in the circles I've shared in Northern Ontario, strawberries are a sacred berry. And obviously that's not necessarily a blanket sacred berry everywhere, but in the traditions I've been so honored to be a part of, strawberries were very sacred for gathering. And so I thought it would be cool to include that. And I can't wait to learn more about what sort of traditional foods and practices and spiritual practices are involved in gathering. And that's going to be so different, of course, from nation to nation, community to community. And so, thank you. And it's awesome to to think that many months later you remembered those muffins. So
I did.
I do think it's so important, is just for everyone everywhere to slow down and listen with intention, actively. And that's how I'm trying to approach this project and how I try to approach my life. And I know it doesn't come naturally, as you said earlier. It's rewiring those neural pathways when we've been conditioned in a culture to be a certain way, is challenging, and it feels uncomfortable at times.
It does. And as we kind of wrap up in what we've talked about so much from strawberries.
Yeah.
From strawberries to a van tour, which again, I'm plugging for me to go with you, to connecting with our communities, to you taking on this huge project that involves the whole country, a program that was started here in British Columbia 20 years ago, and how we can engage with each other. And I'll keep that as a broad umbrella, because I think that's important that you brought that to the conversation today, is that we're all trying to build this together from all different mindsets and approaches, like I shared with mine, and how I need to kind of re-gear a little bit, maybe shift down in my mountain bike terms to a slower gear, and really think about how I need to, what you started this podcast about, listen a little bit more actively and pay closer attention to that. As we kind of wrap up here, I just wanted to ask you one more question, Tricia. If there's one thing search and rescue volunteers and different affiliates and agencies could do today to strengthen Indigenous engagement and building those relationships, what would that be?
Listen.
One
Show
word.
up and listen. Yeah, but listen. Just listen.
It's so important, isn't it? And I appreciate your time today. I've listened as much as I could today, and I could sit and chat with you forever. This is easy.
I know.
You and I are good at that. We've done it before, and we'll do it again. There's no question. But that's it for today's episode. Good chat, Tricia. Thanks for coming out. These conversations remind us that rescue work isn't just about technical skill. It's about leadership, diversity, passion, and strength. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Good Chat with BC Adventure Smart, where stories and safety come together. Remember, enjoying BC's incredible outdoors starts with being prepared. By making informed decisions and learning from experts and adventurers alike, we can lessen the need for search and rescue and build a stronger safety culture across the province. If you enjoyed this episode, please check the show notes for resources and tips. And as always, adventure smart and be prepared. And we'll see you next time on Good Chat with BC Adventure Smart.